Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Go ahead and get started. I know we probably have a couple of stragglers on the call. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our final Macola training webinar. My name is Greg Dario. I'll be joined by Charmaine Schaefer in a minute. We both work with the Ativo group. For those of you who don't know us, we are a Macola reseller based out of Orange County, California. We do have resources spread out across the country, though. I won't get too far into the Ativo group right now. We'll go over that in a little bit. Today's webinar will be about year-end close procedures in Exact Macola. Charmaine is going to lead the presentation and cover progression, ES, and Macola 10s. We have a lot to cover, and we're really lucky to have Charmaine on the call. Before joining Ativo, Charmaine spent nearly 20 years with Exact, working in various support roles. I'll let Charmaine go into a little bit more of her background when I pass the mic, but before I do that, let's cover a couple logistical items. Today's webinar should run about 45 to 50 minutes with time at the end for Q&A. Because we have so much material to cover, we are going to keep everyone's phones on mute. If you do have a question during the presentation, you can use the chat feature on the webinar dashboard. I'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and I'll make sure that we get those questions covered at the end. After the presentation, I will also open up everyone's phone line, so if there are any direct questions, we can do those at that time as well. I just ask that if you don't have any questions, please self-mute your phones so we aren't inundated with background noise. We are recording the webinar. That video should be available on request by tomorrow afternoon, Monday morning at the latest, and we will also make the slide deck available to anyone who requests it. With that out of the way, Charmaine, if you could switch over to the agenda slide, let's take a look at our agenda for today. Alrighty, so here's our agenda. We'll start with a little bit kind of a background of the Ativo group to have a better idea of who we are, and then we'll jump into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. We're going to review specific module requirements for year-end close processing, kind of completing operations and a step-by-step year-end closing. We're going to discuss the general ledger and temporary and final close. We're going to also discuss year-end payroll update requirements and also cover purging considerations. We will be covering, like I said, progression, ES, and EM10 throughout the presentation. So it's a lot to cover. So let's jump right in. Charmaine, if you can take a look at the next slide. So the Ativo group, who are we? Like I said, we are a Macola reseller. We were founded in 1992, so we have, we're in our third decade of being a Macola reseller, and our team collectively has well over 150 years of experience working with Macola software. We specialize in Macola integrations and customizations. We also offer cloud hosting for Macola and credit card processing for Macola, although we won't get into that on this call. Like I said, we are based in Orange County, California. We have a satellite office in Houston, and we have technical resources spread out across the country. Charmaine is actually joining us from Ohio, for example. Kind of our philosophy is, we look to automate processes and transform companies and kind of breathe new life into companies to do more efficient, streamlined, and profitable operations. So that's just a little bit about us. You can see at the bottom of every slide is our contact information as well. So if you have questions that you want to send us, feel free. And now I'm done talking for the next 40 minutes or so, and we'll go ahead and pass the mic to Charmaine.
Hey, again, thanks for attending, everyone. So to complete the year-end in Macola Progression, Macola ES, or M10, you must complete an order entry, complete posting all invoices and credit memos for the year, post any order entry cash that happens to be on invoices that aren't yet posted. In accounts receivable, you need to complete any sales transactions and cash receipts for your year, whether it's the calendar year or your fiscal year, whatever your year end is. And in purchase order and receiving, you need to make sure you're completing all receiving. And in purchase order, close any purchase orders that are eligible to be closed. In the inventory module, You complete all movements or any inventory transactions that need to be done prior to the year end. And in purchase order processing, you need to complete all material issues and POP completion. In shop floor control, you need to complete any material issues or returns. Also in shop control, complete all activity transactions, any shop order closes that need to happen. In MCA, you can make sure that you have posted all your activity transactions. And in labor performance, you need to make sure you've done all generate earnings. And in payroll, make sure that you've completed the last payroll for the year. And in assets, complete that last calculation of depreciation, creating those GL entries for your year end. And in accounts payable, you need to make sure you've completed all check runs, any voucher entry, and everything is posted or processed. And the sequence of the period and year-end closing, probably all familiar with. You need to start with order entry, then accounts receivable, then your production order processing, and then inventory. And then if you have payroll, of course you do your payroll. And purchase order and receiving needs to come before accounts payable. And then if you have assets of depreciation, that needs to be completed. And all of this needs to be completed prior to closing your general ledger. Macola is a transaction date-based system, so everything has to be done prior to the general ledger. And Macola ES makes this a lot easier because all of the period end and year-end processes are all found on the Systems tab, all in one nice little location there, except for, of course, the general ledger is the clear tax accumulators location. So to get over order entry, you need to make sure that you perform the order entry month end by posting all sales history, and sales history period end process needs to be completed, so you're rolling that period forward. In progression, we have the accumulators, so you need to complete the year-end process for accounts receivable and inventory except for clearing the year-to-date accumulators. Then you'll perform the sales history year-end procedure. And again, in progression, clear the AR and IM year-to-date accumulators. After you've printed all of those accounts receivable and inventory reports that pull information from the accumulators. And there are no fields cleared or order entry data captured at year-end. So in accounts receivable in Macola ES and EM10, you will perform the normal month-end process. And then you need to run the accounts receivable sales analysis report because this report still does not have a date selection. So this pulls from your current year and period, so you have to do it prior to clearing accumulators. And in accounts receivable and progression, because of you need to run the sales analysis report because of those accumulators. So the fields that are cleared when you clear the accounts receivable accumulators are year-to-date sales, dollars, your costs, highest customer balance, service code, units, dollars, costs, commissions. So all those fields are cleared. That's why the sales analysis report needs to be run prior to clearing those accumulators. And the fields that are captured are the same year-to-date sales dollars, cost dollars, sales dollars per sales rep, last year sales, last year cost. So with those accumulators, you need to make sure you clear at the right time. And for purchase order and receiving, for all packages, or for all software, you perform the normal period end, then you perform the clear vendor year-to-date statistics. And the fields that are cleared are specific to purchase order information, even though associated with customers. So that'll clear the vendor performance data, the vendor percent late, the vendor lines late, the vendor line items ordered, average cost variance percentage, average reject items percentage, average lead time, and average days late. And there are no fields captured. And for accounts payable in Macola ES and EM10, you perform the AP period end, and the 1099 processing considerations are whether you want to print for the current year or last year. And when you print the 1099s in Macola ES or EM10, you actually can tell the system what year you want, and it'll be calculated at that time and placed into a field on the vendor. And as always, consider purchasing those 1099 miscellaneous forms from Exact Macola. That way you'll be sure that they're compatible. The accounts payable in progression, again, perform the period end procedure. And because of progression, we do have vendor accumulators that we clear. So you want to, we all know there's two separate processes for the clear vendor accumulators. One is for the actual payment information, and the other is for the 1099 payment amounts. So there's two checkboxes on that clear vendor year-to-date accumulator screen. One says fiscal and one says calendar. The fiscal actually clears voucher information, so it's the purchases, the discounts lost. The calendar clears the check amounts and therefore the 1099 amounts. So if you're on a calendar year, you're going to clear both. You're going to check both what says fiscal and what says calendar. Even though it's a bit confusing, you want to do both because you want to clear both the voucher information and the check payment and 1099 information. Then progression, when you actually print the 1099 miscellaneous form or create the 1099 electronic file, you can either use current year or last year. So if you are ready to print your 1099 miscellaneous forms before you clear the accumulators, then you can use the current year. But you can always go ahead and clear those accumulators at your year end if you're not quite ready for 1099 miscellaneous. And then you can just say use last year information when you print or create the file for 1099 miscellaneous. And of course, again, please consider purchasing the 1099 miscellaneous forms from Exact Macola so you ensure compatibility. And we already discussed the fields cleared at year end. When you click on the accumulator clearing that says fiscal, you're actually clearing year-to-date purchases discounts. And when you do the calendar, you're doing amount paid and 1099 amount. And the fields captured at the year end are, again, last year, purchases, discounts, amount paid. It just moves what was previously in current year over to last year. And that's what allows you to use last year when you print your 1099. And for inventory, you will perform the inventory period end process. You'll run the reset allocations, reset on order. You'll clear your year-to-date accumulators after all your reports have been printed. And the fields that are cleared for inventory are year-to-date quantity sold, used, scrapped, year-to-date sales, dollars, and cost of sales dollars. And when you clear them, just like accounts payable, what was in year-to-date moves to last year, and year-to-date zeroes out. So in assets and depreciation in Macola ES and EM10, you'll perform the AD period end, which is basically calculating your depreciation. You'll print all asset year-end reports, and that's it for Macola ES and EM10. In assets and depreciation and progression, you'll perform your period end process, but in progression, there are accumulators in assets. So you need to clear your year-to-date accumulators, which will advance to the new year for all of your accounting period files for all of any asset books you have. This also transfers the year-to-date depreciation totals to the last year depreciation amounts for each asset. It resets the year-to-date depreciation to 0. And when you do the clearing of the accumulators, it actually allows you to purge records that were disposed, any assets that were disposed of that have no year-to-date depreciation. And in progression, it's very important that you do clear the accumulators and not just advance the year to the next year, because each time you calculate depreciation, the software actually starts over to the beginning of the year, calculates where it should be through that period, and subtracts what's already in year-to-date depreciation, so it makes sure you're correct life to date. So if you do not clear the year-to-date depreciation, you're going to get negative calculations for depreciation. Okay, general ledger in Macola ES and EM10. You'll perform your period end processing. Then you'll make sure that you have processed all of your journals, at least through your year-end date. And then in general ledger, you have the clearing of the period-to-date and year-to-date tax accumulators. Also for Macola ES and EM10, for the year-end, you have the process profit loss. This process will actually calculate that year's profit, hopefully, and actually makes entries into the general ledger, your summary entries, to clear out the activity. The process actually does a sum of all entries in each P&L account, and then it creates a called a closing entry, and if that sum is not 0, it'll create another process profit loss entry. So because of this, you can run process profit loss as many times as you need to. It's not just a one-time thing. So for 1 year, you can run it as many times as you need to. And there's also, you can take a look at what is actually going to process prior to actually processing it. General ledger and progression, you need to perform the period end processing. You do not want to move the periods to the next year at this time. And then performing a temporary year-end procedure will actually automatically advance that general ledger accounting file forward 1 year. This makes entries possible both to your prior year and your new year. And you probably don't make entries to the retained earnings because that will affect the retained earnings entry that is created when you do your final final year end. And the temporary year end is allowed to be run only once. If you try to run it again, it will not let you run it again until you have run a final. And running the final year end procedure, when all of your entries are done for your year that you are closing, that actually will close out the P&L accounts, actually wipes out all of the entries in the general ledger. History remains, but the general ledger transactions are actually deleted through and including the final day of your final period of the year you're closing. You also have the option of creating a retained earnings entry. This setup is in GL Setup, where you set the account number and if you are allowed to create the retained earnings entry. That creates a manual journal entry that you then need to post. So to be able to post it, you actually have to have GL Setup checked to allow a one-sided journal entry. The final year end also posts prior year balances to your comparative file. So if you're running financial statements and you're saying compare to last year or 2 years ago, that's using that comparative file. When you do that final year end, you want to perform it with all users out of the system. Actually, it requires all users to be out of the system. It will not allow you to continue. And also, we suggest that you turn off transaction tracking in company setup. Because what that actually does is it creates like a mirror image of your general ledger transaction file. Well, before you do that final year end, you have already made a backup and have it archived somewhere in case something catastrophic happens. So if anything happens during the final year end, you're going to restore that backup, so you don't need transaction tracking on. Then you'll just turn it back on when you're done with the final year end. And because it totally depends on if you've done a temporary year end or not, where you want those general ledger system periods to be, what year you want them set in, it's very important that you be able to tell, have run a temporary year end because maybe somebody else ran it and you didn't know they ran it. So the way to tell if a temporary year end has been performed on this database, on this company, there's 2 ways. You can either tell through SQL in the system period file, which is the SYPRD-FIL. That first record is for general ledger. You will see one for every module that you run. There's a column in that table that is temp year close flag, TMP_YR_CLS_FG. So in that first record, which is for general ledger, you will see either a T or an F. That will indicate to you if the last close that was done is a temporary or the last close that was done was a final. There is no storage of what year was temporarily closed or what year was final closed, just what the last close was. Was it a temporary or was it a final? The other way to tell is to actually go into general ledger processes and go to that temporary year end. You'll see here from these screenshots, if the last close was a final, when you try to run a temporary, it's going to say, are you sure you wish to do that? So it's ready to do the temporary. If the last close you did was a temporary and you try to run the temporary year end, it's going to say, nope, temporary close is all you performed. So it's not going to let you do that temporary again. So that way you can tell, do I need my GL periods in this year or next year to close the year I actually want to close. And for progression for the F9 considerations, when you're working while you're in a temporary close status, that worksheet is probably referencing a prior year. So you need to add a column on that spreadsheet to reference the current year. And be sure that the period portion of the F9 function is set to the correct period. Then after that final year close is done, you're no longer going to be referencing the prior year without saying pull from the comparative file. Okay, for payroll, you'll be performing the month-end process, performing the quarter-end process, and performing W-2 processing. And of course, do not process any New Year's payroll prior to clearing the year-to-date accumulators. Because the accumulators are just accumulators. They will add the new year. And when you go to print W-2s, it'll include the first payroll of the new year. So you want to make sure that you've cleared the employee accumulators prior to doing that first payroll. And you want to make sure you've either printed W-2s before you clear accumulators or create that archive backup database from which to run W-2s. And if you create that archived backup database, you can also use that to actually run the quarter end report. So that gives you some time to breathe since the quarterly reports are not due until the end of January and W-2s are not due until February to the SSA. And when you go to clear the employee accumulators, you actually would clear both quarter to date and year to date prior to running that first payroll. And this slide says the payroll updates are usually available on December 30th or December 31st, but exact release late yesterday. So they are available for progression. There's 2 downloads. For yes, you just run your normal year-end process, or sorry, your normal update process. One note for progression, a addition of a pay period start date was actually added to the time entry header. This is a requirement in the state of California on the check stubs to have your start and end date of your pay period. This addition is not yet in Macola ES or EM10. I was told today that there will be a hot fix available for that so that you can have that change as well. The tax tables are all there. The first tax tables that were released by Symmetry, because Symmetry actually provides all federal and state withholding tables for your calculations of payroll taxes. You can run the update anytime now. When you calculate payroll, the Symmetry tax engine actually reads the check date that you keyed in on the time entry header screen. So that's where the Symmetry tax engine will decide what year's federal and state withholding tables to use for the calculation of payroll. And of course, before your first payroll of the new year is performed, you want to make sure that your FICA, set points, Social Security, Medicare, 401k are all changed. But for this year, they're all the same as they were for 2015. So you don't have to worry about that. For the progression update, there is both a year-end updater and a tax table updater. So there's 2 updates you need to download. They can really be placed anywhere. Most place them in the Macola root directory and then run the update. Okay, purging considerations. We all know Macola does not purge itself. So you must have a process and policy in place. The purge frequency for each type of data or each file, the retention policy for each type of data or file, always set a purge password so no one accidentally hits the purge. And if you don't purge, your system can become progressively slower. Reports, queries, some views are going to take forever. So year end is an excellent opportunity to take the time to purge so you can make your system run much more efficiently, much quicker. So instead of waiting 20 minutes for that aging, it runs in 2. So it's a great time to do it. The most frequently purged should be your general ledger distribution files. If you're running inventory, you know how large that can get very quickly. Another one is your audit trail reports. And then there's the inventory transaction history, any journal histories, purchase history, sales history. So a decision to not purge is not really a recommendation because you'll just get slower and slower and take longer. So a consideration is to purchase the Pulse Archive utility. It's actually an automated way to purge. No data is lost. It actually creates an archive before it purges. It takes minutes to run instead of you taking hours to, okay, I'm going to purge the IM distribution file. And that can take a really long time if you do it through the software. Okay, I'm going to purge AR open file. Again, it can take a really long time through the software. And if you have this Pulse Archive utility, it will indeed take minutes. In the Pulse Archive utility, you can select any files or tables that you want to purge, and you actually select a retention period, 5 years, 7 years, whatever you want to select. And SQL actually removes the records and then recovers the space. So it actually will shrink what is being required for the storage of your database. So of course, the best time to do this is year end with everything else you're doing. The Pulse Archive utility runs approximately $3,500, but it is so worth it. So you can call us if you would like to know more about the Pulse Archive utility, and we'll be glad to walk you through. Greg, are you there?
I am right here. So we did have a couple questions pop up during the presentation that we can cover, and then I will go ahead and unmute phone lines in case there are any direct questions that anyone would like to ask Charmaine. Let's start with the chat question. And I think you might have touched on this, Charmaine, but if someone performs, like, for example, the account period file maintenance early, or if they perform one of the other steps early, is there a way to go back in the process, or is it a situation where they kind of have to go back to their backup data and start from scratch?
Yeah, it depends on what they're talking about, but generally, yeah, it's a restore time. That's why you always have a current backup before you do any of the year-end procedures.
And then you talked a little bit about considerations for F9 in progression. Are there any other considerations that someone needs to take into account for other third-party applications, let's say YSIS or like an EDI application?
Yeah, again, that would be determined about what table, what file that third-party application is using. If you have a report a crystal report or any third-party application that is pulling from accumulators, and then you clear accumulators, of course, that application is going to be negatively affected. It's going to zero everything out.
Okay, those were the two chat questions that came on. Let me go ahead and at this time, I have unmuted everyone's phone. So if anyone has any direct questions they'd like to ask Charmaine, now would definitely be the time.
I have a question. Currently, we're using the Macola ES, and you mentioned earlier about closing temporary. I cannot find in the GL module. Is that what you're referring?
That was only progression.
Oh, I see. So the only thing we can do is through system, right? System and then the period and year end and then process profit and loss.
Right, but you can run it any number of times, and you can actually look at it before you actually process it.
Oh, I see. So how do you look at it?
If you do process profit loss, it actually brings up a screen that you can actually look at and see what it's going to do prior to processing.
Oh, I see. Got it. Oh, so it's a run a report. Is that what you meant?
It's basically a report, but it pops up on the screen, so you can actually look at it there. And decide, is this okay? Do I want to process, or should I look at something, change something before I try it again?
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
And remember, you can do it. Yeah, and you can do it any number of times, because each time you process profit loss, the system actually sums up all the activity for that period, that year, for each P&L account, and if it finds that it needs another closing entry, then it'll create another one for you to process.
Oh, I see, okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have any other questions? Do we have any other questions? Going once, going twice.
And one more question on the profit loss thing. They're asking for journal number. Is it journal number?
That's the journal number, that the entry will be created in.
Oh, I see. So you can just choose 90, or do just a general journal or something. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, it must be a general journal, but yes, you can choose any general journal you want, and that's you can create one to be used only for year end if you want.
Good. And then on the account balance sheet, it should be return earning, right? Because you put everything on the return earning. Okay.
Yes.
I see. Oh, I see. What you meant is the display. So you will see the display first, and then after that you click. I see. Got it.
So you can say no and just close out, or you can say, yes, that looks good. Process. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I'll try. Thank you.
Okay. You can always look.
Yeah. Yes, hi, this is Jeanette. I do have a question. We actually do the, for the AR, I see that you need to run the AR sales analysis report. Currently what I normally do is just post sales history and then do the sales history period and or year-end procedure.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
What's the effect of not running the AR sales analysis report?
Well, the sales analysis report pulls from accumulators. So if you're running that report, anytime you clear the accumulators, it's going to affect that report.
Okay. So it's just actually just a report, because right now we're not even running that report. Okay.
It's just a report. Yeah, and so it pulls, it doesn't have a date range, so it defaults to your current period and current year, so that's why.
Okay. And then I do have another question. For the PO and receiving, we don't perform the clear vendor year-to-date statistics process.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. In Macola, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
It's more important in progression. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Are you going to share your slides?
Absolutely.
I see. That would be awesome.
The email on the slide there, info@ativoconsulting.com. If you just want to send an email to that address requesting the slides, I'll be sure to send it out to anyone who asks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
And you can also contact us with any questions, right?
Yeah, any questions you have after the fact, if you want the video recording should be ready by tomorrow afternoon. All the contact information you can see right there on the screen, phone number, email. You could also email me directly, Greg, G-R-E-G, @ativoconsulting.com, and I'd be happy to take care of any questions you have as well. I might not be able to answer them directly, but I'll make sure that I get you in touch with the right person. And if we don't have any other questions, I will go ahead and once again just thank everyone for joining us today. We managed to keep it within that hour time frame, which is always the goal. I'd like to thank Charmaine for taking time to go over this with everyone. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.